The radio booth was smaller than most people imagined. Studio lights reflected off the soundproofed walls, three microphones arranged in a semicircle, and Megyn Kelly leaned back in her chair with the posture of someone who had never once questioned whether she belonged in the room. She had been doing this for 20 years. Cable news. Prime time. Now, her own podcast empire, she knew how these conversations went. She knew how to control them. And when Representative Jasmine Crockett walked into the studio that morning, Kelly's smile had a very particular quality to it, the kind of smile that said she had already decided how this interview would end. "So you're the congresswoman everyone's talking about," Kelly said, her voice carrying that trademark blend of amusement and skepticism that had built her career. The viral moment queen. The one with the memorable phrases. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning Crockett with the assessment of someone sizing up an opponent who didn't know they were already outmatched. "Tell me something, Representative. Before you were making TikToks in committee hearings, what exactly qualified you to be writing legislation that affects 330 million Americans? I'm genuinely curious." The question hung in the studio air. Kelly's producer, visible through the glass partition, shifted in his seat. The pause lasted just long enough to communicate what Kelly wanted it to communicate, that the question was not rhetorical, that she expected an answer, and that she very much doubted that answer would be sufficient. Crockett sat across from her, hands folded on the desk, her expression unchanged. She did not lean forward to match Kelly's energy. She did not smile back. She simply waited, as if Kelly's question was still forming, as if there might be more coming, as if she had all the time in the world. Kelly continued, filling the space Crockett had left open. "I mean, you were a public defender, is that right? Defending criminals in Dallas? And then suddenly you're in Congress and we're supposed to believe you understand foreign policy, economic policy, national security?" She laughed, not cruelly exactly, but with the casual dismissiveness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where her opinion mattered more than other people's credentials. "I just think voters have a right to know whether the people writing laws have any actual expertise beyond going viral on social media. Don't you think that's fair?" Crockett had been a public defender for 9 years. 3,000 cases. She had stood in front of judges who assumed she was the defendant's girlfriend. She had cross-examined police officers who called her sweetie on the stand. She had walked into courtrooms where opposing counsel addressed her co-counsel, always male, always white, and ignored her entirely until she stood and identified herself as lead counsel. And in every single one of those courtrooms, she had learned the same lesson: let them talk, let them assume, let them believe they had already won. And then, when the room was quiet, when they were done performing, when they thought the outcome was settled, that was when you opened the first folder. She opened it now. The sound was crisp in the close acoustics of the radio booth. Inside was a single document, printed on official congressional letterhead, marked with 3 separate colored tabs. She placed it on the table between them with the gentleness of someone placing a loaded weapon in full view. Kelly's eyes moved to the document. Something in her posture changed. Not yet concerned, but the first small recognition that this interview might not follow the script she had prepared. "You asked what qualified me," Crockett said quietly, her voice steady and unhurried. "Let me answer that. As a public defender in Dallas County, I represented indigent defendants in 3,012 cases over 9 years. That's an average of 334 cases per year. During that time, I filed 217 motions to suppress evidence obtained through unconstitutional search and seizure. I won 193 of those motions. That's an 89% success rate against law enforcement officers who violated the Fourth Amendment rights of citizens." Kelly opened her mouth to respond. Crockett continued, "In those 9 years, I tried 73 jury trials. I won 48 of them. Not plea bargains, not continuances. Full jury trials where I had to convince 12 citizens to disbelieve police testimony, forensic evidence presented by the state, and prosecutors with unlimited resources. And I did that 48 times." She turned the first tabbed page. "This is the record from the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. I'm one of 87 attorneys in the state certified as a specialist in criminal defense. That certification requires 1,000 hours of trial time, 50 hours of continuing education, and peer review from sitting judges. You asked what qualifies me to write legislation? I spent nearly a decade defending the constitutional rights of people who had no power, no money, and no voice in rooms where everyone else assumed they were already guilty." The studio had gone very quiet. Kelly's producer was leaning forward now, his hand hovering near the mixing board as if he might need to cut to commercial. Kelly herself had not yet responded. Her smile had not disappeared entirely, but it had changed shape, narrowed, become more calculated. She reached for her notes, flipping through the pages with the practiced efficiency of someone looking for the next attack angle. "That's impressive," Kelly said, her tone carrying a new edge of caution. "But criminal defense work, that's defending people who broke the law, right? You're arguing to get people off on technicalities. That doesn't exactly translate to understanding how to govern." Crockett turned to the second tab. The document beneath it was a committee assignment sheet stamped and signed by the House Speaker's office. "I serve on the House Oversight and Accountability Committee," she said. "In my first 18 months in Congress, I have participated in 43 hearings. I have questioned cabinet secretaries, agency directors, and corporate executives under oath. I've reviewed subpoenaed documents, financial disclosures, and internal communications that those executives tried to keep hidden from the American people." She placed a second document on the table. This one was thicker, a bound report with a blue cover and the congressional seal embossed in gold. "This is the committee's report on waste, fraud, and abuse in pandemic relief spending. I personally reviewed 800 pages of Treasury Department records. I identified 3 specific instances where corporations received relief funds while simultaneously paying shareholder dividends and executive bonuses. Those 3 companies received a combined $467 million in taxpayer money. Not one of them was legally required to account for how that money was spent." Kelly leaned forward, trying to regain control. "So you found some corporate waste. Congratulations. Every congressperson says they're fighting corruption. But when it comes to actual policy, let me finish," Crockett said, and something in her voice made Kelly stop. "Not raised, not sharp, just absolutely certain. You asked what qualifies me. I'm telling you. In that same oversight role, I questioned the former CEO of a defense contractor who had overbilled the Department of Defense by $112 million over 6 years. He testified under oath that the billing discrepancies were accounting errors. I had his company's internal emails. He had personally approved those charges. He knew they were fraudulent. And when I read his own words back to him, like his exact email saying, "Bill it under training costs, they never audit training," he went silent for 23 seconds on camera. The committee referred him for criminal prosecution. That referral is pending. She turned to the third tab. Underneath it was a photograph, a professional headshot of a young woman in military dress uniform, smiling, one hand resting on a flag. "This is Specialist Maria Ochoa. She served 2 tours in Afghanistan. She came home with a traumatic brain injury and PTSD. She applied for veterans benefits in 2019. Her application was denied 3 times by the VA. She appealed each time. Each appeal took 18 months. While waiting for her 3rd appeal to be processed, she lost her apartment. She was living in her car in San Antonio when I met her at a town hall in my district." Kelly's hands had stilled on her notepad. The studio felt smaller now, the walls closer. Crockett's voice remained steady, but something colder had entered it, something that had nothing to do with performance or politics or viral moments. "I called the VA myself. I reviewed her case file personally. Her denials were based on a technicality in how her injury was classified during her initial discharge evaluation. 1 checkbox. One administrative assistant had checked the wrong box, and that mistake had followed her through 3 years of appeals. I got that classification changed. Her benefits were approved in 6 weeks. She has stable housing now. She's receiving the treatment she was promised when she enlisted. And that happened because I knew how to read a case file, how to identify a procedural error, and how to make a federal agency correct it." She closed the folder. The sound was final, definitive. "You asked what qualifies me to write legislation. I can tell you exactly what qualifies me. I have spent my entire professional life in systems that were designed to favor power over truth. Courtrooms where the state has unlimited resources and my client has nothing. Government bureaucracies where veterans get lost in paperwork while administrators collect their salaries. Corporate boardrooms where executives lie under oath because they believe no one will do the homework to catch them. And in every single one of those systems, I did the work that no one else wanted to do. I read the documents no one else would read. I asked the questions no one else would ask. And I held powerful people accountable when they believed they were beyond accountability." Kelly tried to interrupt. "But that's not the same as—" "Let me ask you a question now," Crockett said, and her tone had not risen, but it had sharpened, the way a blade sharpens when it's pressed against stone. "You've been a journalist for 20 years. You've interviewed presidents, senators, CEOs. You've moderated debates. You've had your own primetime shows on 2 major networks. In all that time, in all those interviews, how many times have you personally reviewed the source documents for the claims your guests were making? Not taken their word for it. Not relied on your producers. Actually read the contracts, the financial disclosures, the emails, the depositions yourself. How many times? The question landed in the studio like a stone dropped into still water. The silence that followed was immediate and total. Kelly's mouth opened slightly. No words came. Her eyes moved to her producer. He was frozen, hands still on the mixing board, waiting for direction that wasn't coming. 10 seconds passed. 15. 20. The red recording light on the microphone glowed steadily. Somewhere in the building, a ventilation system hummed. Kelly's pen, which had been tapping a soft rhythm against her notepad, had stopped. 30 seconds. 40. The producer finally moved, reaching for his headset, his face communicating what his boss could not, that this was the longest unplanned silence their show had ever broadcast. 50 seconds. 52. When Kelly finally spoke, her voice had lost the casual certainty that had opened the interview. I think that's a different kind of journalism than legislative work. Is it? Crockett's interruption was gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it more devastating. Because it seems to me that both jobs require the same thing. You have to do the homework. You have to read what no one else wants to read. You have to ask questions that powerful people don't want to answer. And you have to be willing to sit in the uncomfortable silence when they realize they've been caught. She paused, let that silence return for just a moment, let Kelly feel it again. You asked me if viral moments in social media were enough to qualify someone for Congress. I think that's a fair question. But let me tell you what I've learned. The moments that go viral aren't the ones I plan. They're the moments when someone with power says something arrogant or dismissive or false, and I have the receipts to prove it. Those moments go viral because people are tired of watching powerful people lie without consequence. They're tired of watching people in authority dismiss questions they can't answer. They're tired of being told that their eyes are lying to them. She opened a fourth folder. Kelly's eyes tracked the movement, wary now. Inside was a printout of Kelly's own show transcript from 3 months earlier, highlighted in yellow specific quotes marked with red pen. On October 14th, you had a guest on your show who claimed that Democrat policies had caused the national debt to increase by $8 trillion. You nodded along. You called it shocking but not surprising. You told your audience that this was proof of fiscal irresponsibility. Crockett looked up from the page, her gaze level and unblinking. The Congressional Budget Office publishes debt analysis by administration. It's public record. Anyone can access it. The $8 trillion increase your guest cited included $6 trillion in spending that originated from bills signed by Republican presidents. The tax cuts alone accounted for $2.3 trillion. Did you know that when you nodded along? Or did you just trust that your guest wouldn't lie to your audience because correcting him would have been uncomfortable? Kelly's face had changed color. Not dramatically. Not obviously. But the studio lights caught the flush creeping up from her collar, the way her jaw tightened, the way her hands pressed flat against the desk as if she needed something solid beneath her palms. She opened her mouth twice before words finally came. I can't fact-check every single claim every guest makes in real time. That's not realistic. I agree, Crockett said. It's not realistic. It takes time. It takes preparation. It takes sitting with documents that are boring and technical and reading them until you understand them completely. It takes doing work that doesn't feel like television. It takes being willing to tell a guest or a colleague or a donor or a president that they're wrong when you have proof they're wrong. Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you something, she closed the fourth folder. You asked what qualifies me to write legislation. That does. The willingness to do the boring work, the ability to sit with complexity until it becomes clear, the refusal to let powerful people get away with lies just because correcting them would be awkward. That's what qualifies me. Not viral moments. Not social media. The homework. Kelly had recovered some of her composure now. Her hands had steadied. Her voice, when she spoke again, carried a defensive edge. You're making this sound like I'm the one on trial here. I invited you on my show. I gave you a platform. You did, Crockett agreed, and I appreciate that. But you started this interview by questioning whether I was qualified to be in Congress. You suggested that my work as a public defender was just defending criminals. You implied that going viral meant I wasn't serious. And you did all of that without looking at my actual record, my actual qualifications, or my actual work product. You made assumptions about what kind of congresswoman I am based on the fact that young people share my committee clips on TikTok. That's the same mistake people have been making about me my entire career. They see a black woman. They see someone young. They see someone who doesn't talk like a corporate lawyer. And they assume I haven't done the homework. They assume I'm playing a character. They assume the viral moments are the strategy instead of the consequence. She placed one final document on the table. This one was not in a folder. It was a single sheet of paper printed on plain white stock, no letterhead, no official seal, just text. This is the oath I took when I was sworn into Congress. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. That's the job. Not viral moments, not Twitter wars, not cable news appearances. The job is to read the bills, read the budgets, read the oversight reports. Ask the questions no one else is asking. Demand answers from people who are used to not having to answer. And do it all in service of 333 million people, most of whom will never know my name, never see my committee hearings, and never watch a single viral clip. Kelly's notepad had been abandoned. Her hands rested on the desk, motionless. The producer had stopped signaling entirely. The studio had the feeling of a place where something unplanned and irreversible had occurred, where the careful architecture of format and time limits had collapsed under the weight of something too substantial to contain. At the beginning of this interview, Crockett said, her voice quiet now but carrying perfect clarity, you asked what qualified me to be writing legislation. You questioned whether a public defender from Dallas had any business in Congress. You laughed, not meanly but dismissively, at the idea that viral moments could coexist with serious policy work. But here's what you didn't ask. You didn't ask how many bills I've introduced. You didn't ask about my committee work. You didn't ask about the legislation I've co-sponsored or the amendments I've gotten included in final passage bills. You didn't ask because you'd already decided the answer. You thought you knew what kind of congresswoman I was before I ever walked into this studio. She stood. The movement was unhurried, almost gentle. She gathered her folders with the same careful precision with which she had opened them, stacking them in order, aligning the edges. Kelly watched her, and something in her face suggested she knew what was coming next, that she had conducted enough interviews to recognize when the power in a room had shifted beyond recovery. You gave me a platform, Crockett said, and I'm grateful for that. But the platform isn't the point. The work is the point. The documents are the point. The veterans who got their benefits, the contractors who got paid, the executives who got referred for prosecution, the constituents who called my office because the VA lost their paperwork or the IRS made an error or they needed help with a passport and no one else would return their calls. That's the work. That's what qualifies me. Not because it goes viral, because it matters. She turned toward the studio door. Kelly found her voice one final time, the professional instinct to fill dead air overriding everything else. Representative Crockett, thank you for coming on the show. Crockett paused at the door, her hand on the frame. She looked back at Kelly and her expression held no anger, no triumph, no satisfaction. Just a kind of tired certainty, the look of someone who had made the same point in 100 different rooms to 100 different skeptics and knew she would have to make it 100 more times before people stopped being surprised. You questioned my qualifications when I walked in here, she said quietly. But I wasn't the one who couldn't answer a simple question about whether I'd done the homework. That silence you heard, that 52 seconds, that wasn't me struggling to respond. That was you realizing that the assumptions you made about me were wrong and that the work you dismissed as going viral was actually someone doing the job exactly the way it's supposed to be done, with evidence, with preparation, with accountability. That's not viral politics. That's just governing. The door closed behind her with a soft click. In the studio, Kelly sat motionless, her microphone still live, the red recording light still glowing. Her producer stared at her through the glass partition, waiting for a signal that didn't come. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10, 15. And finally, Kelly reached forward and switched off her mic, the small electronic pop the only sound in the room. The recording was uploaded to the podcast network 3 hours later. Within 24 hours, it had been downloaded 400,000 times. The 52-second silence became its own clip, shared across every social media platform, viewed 12 million times in the first week. But the people who shared it weren't celebrating a viral moment. They were sharing evidence that someone had finally asked the right questions, evidence that powerful people could be held accountable, Evidence that the woman they had been told was just a social media personality had walked into a hostile interview with a former cable news anchor and left that anchor unable to answer the simplest question about her own work. Not with rhetoric, not with performance, with homework, with preparation, with the same relentless, documented calm that had carried her through 3,000 criminal cases, 73 jury trials, and 43 congressional hearings. The silence wasn't the story. The work was the story. It had always been the work. The silence was just the sound of someone finally realizing that